People think destiny arrives with fireworks. In my experience, it usually shows up while everyone else is looking the other way. The morning it happened, Boston was cold enough to make every breath visible. The sidewalks shimmered with last night's rain, and the city moved with its usual urgency. Horns echoed through downtown streets. Coffee cups rushed past in gloved hands. Nobody looked at anyone for more than a second. I was running late for work. Again, the digital clock on the bus stop flashed 8:12 a.m., and my shift at the community library started in less than 20 minutes. I should have been thinking about attendance reports and overdue books. Instead, I noticed an elderly woman standing alone at the edge of a busy intersection. She looked small against the tide of people flowing around her. Her silver hair moved in the wind. One hand gripped a cane. The other held a grocery bag that seemed too heavy for her. The walk signal changed. People surged forward. The woman did not move. For a moment, nobody noticed. Then I realized she was afraid. Cars rolled past. The traffic light counted down. 15 seconds. 14. 13. I glanced toward my approaching bus, then back at her. The choice should have been difficult. Somehow it was not. I stepped away from the bus stop and crossed the sidewalk toward her. "Would you like some help?" I asked. Relief appeared in her eyes almost instantly. "Would you mind?" she said softly. "Not at all." I offered my arm. She accepted it with both hands. Together we stepped into the crosswalk. The city continued racing around us. Drivers watched the light. Pedestrians watched their phones. Nobody paid attention to the old woman and the girl helping her move 10 feet at a time. Nobody except one person. Halfway across the street, the woman smiled at me. "You are very kind." I laughed quietly. "My mother would say I am just late again." The woman laughed too. It was a small sound. Warm. Genuine. By the time we reached the opposite sidewalk, the signal had nearly expired. I adjusted her grocery bag and made sure she felt steady before letting go. "Thank you, dear," she said. "You probably missed something important because of me." I looked across the street just in time to watch my bus disappear around the corner. "Nothing that cannot wait." Her eyes softened. Then she squeezed my hand once before continuing down the block. I watched until she safely disappeared into the crowd. Only then did I realize how cold my hands had become. I tucked them into my coat pockets and started walking toward the library. It was nearly a mile away. Not ideal, but not the end of the world. What I did not know was that a black SUV had been parked beside the intersection the entire time. Behind tinted glass sat a man who rarely noticed strangers. A man whose days were filled with meetings, influence, and decisions that changed other people's lives. Yet for reasons he could not explain, he found himself watching a young woman walk away from the intersection long after everyone else had forgotten her. And for the first time in years, Luca Moretti leaned forward in his seat and told his driver to wait. Most people disappear from each other's lives in less than a minute. That should have been the end of the story. I helped an elderly woman cross the street. I missed my bus. Life moved on. At least that was what I believed. The library was already busy when I arrived 22 minutes late. Children filled the reading area. Parents stood near the front desk. A line of returned books waited to be sorted. The familiar scent of paper, coffee, and old wooden shelves wrapped around me the moment I stepped inside. "Running late again?" my coworker Sarah asked with a grin. "The city keeps testing me. And you keep failing." I laughed and slipped behind the circulation desk. The day passed the way most days did. I helped a teenager find a history book. I read aloud to a group of elementary school students. I showed an elderly veteran how to use the library's new computer system. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of moments most people never remember. Yet somehow they always mattered to me. Around noon, while organizing returned novels, I noticed a little boy sitting alone near the window. He could not have been older than 8. A backpack rested beside him. A book sat open on his lap. But he was not reading. He was staring out at the street. "Everything okay?" I asked gently. He looked up. "My mom is late." "How late?" 20 minutes. His voice tried to sound brave. It did not quite succeed. I sat beside him for a moment. Together we watched the traffic outside. 5 minutes later, a woman rushed through the front doors, clearly exhausted and apologizing before she even reached him. The boy smiled immediately. Relief transformed his entire face. As they left, the mother mouthed 2 words toward me. "Thank you." I smiled back and returned to work. I never noticed the man standing across the street watching through the library windows. Luca Moretti stood inside a quiet cafe directly opposite the building. A cup of untouched coffee sat on the table before him. He had arrived almost an hour earlier, long enough to confirm what his investigators had already told him. Emily Carter worked at the community library. Emily Carter rented a modest apartment. Emily Carter volunteered twice a month at a local food pantry. None of those facts interested him nearly as much as what he was seeing now. She treated everyone exactly the same. Children, elderly visitors, strangers. Nobody received special attention. Nobody received less. It was not performance. It was simply who she was. Luca had spent years surrounded by people who carefully calculated every interaction. Every favor carried a price. Every smile hid an agenda. Yet the woman across the street seemed completely unaware that the world often worked that way. "You have been staring at that library for 40 minutes, his driver said quietly. Luca did not look away from the window. "And that is unusual." A faint smile touched Luca's face. "I am aware." Across the street, I finally glanced outside while carrying a stack of books. For a brief moment, my eyes landed on the cafe window opposite the library. I thought I saw someone looking toward me. Then a city bus rolled between us. By the time it passed, the figure was gone. I dismissed the feeling immediately and continued working. Some stories begin with a grand moment. Ours began with 2 strangers occupying opposite sides of the same street. One of them had no idea she was being noticed. The other could not seem to look away. There are people who enter your life with noise. Then there are people who arrive so quietly that you do not notice them until everything feels different. A week passed. Then another. Life settled into its familiar rhythm. Every morning I walked the same route to the library. Every afternoon I helped visitors find books, complete applications, or navigate computers that seemed determined to confuse them. Every evening I returned to my small apartment, heated leftovers, and convinced myself I was perfectly content. The truth was simpler. I was busy. Busy people rarely stop long enough to ask whether they are happy. One rainy Thursday afternoon, the library was unusually quiet. Water tapped softly against the tall windows while gray clouds hung low over Boston. Most visitors had stayed home. I was reorganizing a shelf of historical biographies when the front doors opened. First I barely looked up. Then I noticed him. The man from the cafe window across the street. The man I had glimpsed only briefly before the city bus blocked my view. He stepped inside carrying a dark umbrella. Tall. Confident. Perfectly composed. Everything about him suggested he belonged somewhere far more expensive than a community library. Yet he paused near the entrance and looked around with genuine curiosity. I immediately switched into employee mode. "Can I help you find something?" His eyes met mine. Green. Calm. Focused. For a fraction of a second it felt as though he recognized me. Then the expression vanished. "Possibly," he said. His voice was low and controlled. "I am looking for recommendations." I smiled. "That depends. Fiction or nonfiction? Whichever you would choose." The answer surprised me. Most people already knew what they wanted. That is a dangerous amount of trust for a stranger. A faint smile appeared. It transformed his entire face. I like taking calculated risks. For the next 10 minutes I showed him several books. History. Memoirs. A few novels I secretly loved. He listened carefully to every recommendation. Not pretending to listen. Actually listening. That alone made him unusual. Eventually he selected 2 books and carried them toward the circulation desk. "You seem to know everyone here," he observed. I glanced toward a group of children gathered near the reading corner. "Occupational hazard. And they all seem happy to see you." I laughed softly. "Most of them only like me because I tell them where the adventure books are." His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. As though he was comparing the woman in front of him with someone he had imagined. After checking out the books, he thanked me and headed toward the exit. I assumed that would be the end of it. Then he stopped beside the door. Emily. I looked up. Yes. Another small smile appeared. Thank you for the recommendation. Then he disappeared into the rain. I stood there longer than I should have. Something about the encounter felt strangely important. I did not know his name. I did not know why he seemed familiar. I only knew that for the rest of the afternoon, I caught myself glancing toward the front doors. And somewhere across the city, Luca Moretti sat inside the back seat of a black SUV, holding 2 library books he had no intention of reading. Because the truth was, he had not come for the books. He had come to confirm that the woman who helped strangers on a busy street was exactly who she appeared to be. And for the first time in a very long time, he was relieved to discover she was. Some storms arrive with thunder. Others arrive disguised as ordinary Tuesday mornings. 3 days after the man from the library disappeared back into the rain, my world began to tilt in a direction I never saw coming. The morning started normally enough. Children filled the reading corner. Retirees browsed newspapers near the front windows. The heating system made its usual rattling noises. Everything felt familiar. Safe. Then my supervisor asked me to step into her office. The moment I saw her expression, I knew something was wrong. Margaret had worked at the library for nearly 20 years. She was the kind of person who could calm an entire room simply by smiling. That morning she looked exhausted. A folder rested on her desk. Several documents lay spread across the surface. Budget reports. Financial projections. Numbers I did not fully understand. Emily, she said quietly, I need to tell you something. My stomach tightened immediately. She explained that city funding had been reduced again. Donations had declined. Operating costs continued rising. The library board would meet within a few weeks to decide its future. If additional funding could not be found, the building might close permanently. For several seconds I could not process the words. Close. The library had served the neighborhood for decades. Children learned to read here. Seniors attended workshops here. Families who could not afford internet access relied on these computers every day. The idea felt impossible. Yet the fear in Margaret's eyes told me it was very real. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I smiled at visitors, checked out books, answered questions, performed every task exactly as I always had. But beneath the routine, worry followed me everywhere. Every shelf suddenly felt more important. Every conversation felt more fragile. Near closing time, I watched a group of children gathering for an after-school reading program. One little girl hugged a book against her chest and announced that she wanted to become a writer someday. Another boy proudly showed me a science project he had completed using library resources. Looking at them, my heart broke a little. They deserved this place. The entire neighborhood did. That evening, after locking the front doors, I remained inside longer than usual. The library was quiet. Sunlight faded beyond the windows. Rows of books stretched into soft shadows. I walked slowly through the aisles, running my fingers along familiar shelves. It felt less like a building and more like a home that might soon disappear. Across the city, Luca Moretti sat inside a private conference room overlooking Boston Harbor. Several executives spoke around a polished table. Charts filled large screens. Business opportunities were discussed. Investments were analyzed. Yet Luca's attention drifted elsewhere. One of his associates entered quietly and placed a file beside him. The report contained information he had not requested directly but had received anyway. Community library funding crisis. He opened it. Read every page. Then read it again. The room continued talking around him. Nobody noticed the subtle change in his expression. Nobody except his oldest advisor. Problem? The man asked. Luca closed the file slowly. Through the glass wall behind him, the city lights were beginning to appear. Possibly. Business problem? For a moment Luca said nothing. Then a faint smile appeared. The kind that usually meant a decision had already been made. No, he said quietly. Something more important. And thousands of feet away, completely unaware of the conversation taking place, I turned off the final light inside the library and stepped into the cold evening air, not realizing that someone powerful had just learned about the one problem I could not solve alone. Hope can be dangerous when you do not know whether it belongs to you. The week after I learned about the library's financial crisis felt longer than an entire year. Every morning I arrived expecting good news. Every evening I left carrying the same uncertainty. Staff meetings became quieter. Conversations stopped when visitors entered the room. Even the children seemed to sense something was wrong. One afternoon, a 10-year-old boy named Ethan approached the front desk holding a stack of books nearly as tall as his chest. "Miss Carter?" he asked. "Yeah. The library is not really closing, right?" The question hit harder than I expected. I forced a smile. "We are doing everything we can." He nodded slowly. Children always know when adults are avoiding the truth. After he walked away, I stared at the rows of books surrounding me. Thousands of stories filled those shelves. Generations of memories.
Countless seconde chance.
The idea of losing all of it felt unbearable. That evening, several community members gathered inside the reading room after closing. Teachers, parents, retirees, volunteers. Everyone wanted to help. Ideas filled the room. Fundraisers, donation drives, community events. We wrote plans across whiteboards until nearly 9 o'clock. Yet when the numbers were added together, the reality remained the same. We were nowhere close to the funding required. Walking home that night, Boston felt colder than usual. Wind swept through the streets. Storefront lights reflected across damp sidewalks. People hurried toward restaurants and apartments and families waiting for them. I pulled my coat tighter and wondered what would happen if the library disappeared. Not just to me, to everyone. Across the city, Luca Moretti sat inside a private office surrounded by information, property records, investment proposals, development plans, everything connected to the neighborhood surrounding the library. His team had spent days investigating. The conclusions were simple. A commercial development group wanted the land. The library occupied valuable property. Closing it would create opportunities worth millions. One executive sitting across from Luca pointed toward a report. "From a financial perspective, the redevelopment makes sense." Luca looked at the document, then closed it. I did not ask what makes sense financially. Silence followed. The executive shifted uncomfortably. Luca stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. "Tell me about the neighborhood." Another advisor answered immediately. "High student population, limited community resources, significant dependence on public services." Luca nodded once. "And the library?" "Heavily utilized, especially by children and seniors." For several moments nobody spoke. Then Luca asked a question that surprised everyone in the room. How much would it cost to solve the problem permanently? The answer came within seconds. The amount was substantial. For most people, impossible. For Luca, it barely registered. He listened quietly before thanking everyone and dismissing the meeting. Once alone, he remained by the window watching city lights stretch into the distance. He thought about an elderly woman crossing a street. A young librarian who never expected recognition for doing the right thing. A library full of people who depended on a place most powerful individuals would never notice. Then he made a phone call. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes.
No dramatic speeches. No negotiations.
No raised voices. Just a decision. By the following morning, several organizations received unexpected requests for meetings. Legal teams began preparing documents. Financial institutions started moving resources. Nobody connected any of it to a community library, least of all me. The next day, I unlocked the library doors and stepped inside expecting another difficult morning. Instead, I found Margaret standing near the front desk holding a letter in trembling hands. Her eyes were wide. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me and whispered 6 words that immediately changed the air inside the room. "Emily, something unbelievable just happened." Some miracles arrive so quietly that nobody notices them until they are already changing lives. For several seconds after Margaret spoke, I simply stared at her. The letter trembled slightly in her hands. Around us, the library remained perfectly ordinary. Books sat on shelves. Computers hummed softly. Morning sunlight spilled through the front windows. Yet the expression on her face suggested something extraordinary had happened. "What is it?" I asked. Margaret looked down at the paper again as though she still could not believe it herself. We received funding. My heart skipped. What kind of funding? Enough. The word barely came out above a whisper. Enough to keep the library open. For a moment neither of us moved. Then the reality crashed into me all at once. Relief. Shock. Gratitude. Hope. Every emotion arrived together. I sank into the nearest chair and laughed before I realized tears had filled my eyes. Margaret laughed too. The sound echoed through the empty morning library. Where did it come from? I finally asked. She shook her head. An anonymous foundation.
Zavezli?
Completely. The letter explained that a private philanthropic organization had committed long-term funding, not only for operating costs but also for building improvements, technology upgrades, educational programs, and community outreach. It was more than survival. It was a future. News spread quickly. By lunchtime, the entire staff knew. By evening, the neighborhood knew. Parents stopped by, simply to say thank you. Retirees brought homemade cookies. Children celebrated as though school had been canceled for a week. The library felt brighter than it had in years. Everywhere I looked, people were smiling. Yet beneath the celebration, one question remained. Who had done this? Nobody seemed to know. Nobody could find answers. The foundation existed. The paperwork was legitimate. The money was real. But the source remained hidden behind layers of privacy. Several days passed. Renovation plans began. New equipment arrived. Community programs expanded. Life improved so quickly it almost felt unreal. Then late one afternoon, the front doors opened and a familiar figure stepped inside.
Luca Moretti.
I had not seen him in nearly 2 weeks. He carried one of the library books I recommended earlier. The same book I suspected he never actually intended to read. You came back, I said before I could stop myself. A small smile appeared. I borrowed a book. That was weeks ago. I am a slow reader. The answer was delivered so seriously that I almost believed him. Almost. We walked together toward the circulation desk. Around us, children worked on homework while volunteers prepared for an evening literacy program. Everything felt alive. Luca seemed to notice it too. His eyes moved through the room carefully, taking in every detail. Something changed here, he observed. I smiled immediately. You noticed. Hard not to. Pride warmed my voice. The library was saved. His expression remained calm. Too calm. That is good news. I studied him for a moment. Most people would have asked questions. Most people would have seemed surprised. Luca looked neither surprised nor curious. Just quietly pleased. The realization brushed against the edge of my thoughts before slipping away. An anonymous foundation stepped in. Generous of them. Very. We stopped near the front windows. Outside, Boston moved through another busy afternoon. Inside, children laughed near the reading corner. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then an elderly woman approached carrying a stack of novels. I immediately stepped forward to help. By the time I finished, Luca was watching me. With that familiar, thoughtful expression again. The one I never quite understood. What? I asked. A faint smile touched his face. Nothing. I narrowed my eyes. That is never true. His smile widened slightly. Then he glanced around the library one last time. At the families. The books. The people whose lives had just changed. For a brief second, satisfaction appeared in his eyes before disappearing completely. I did not know it then, but I had just seen the first crack in a secret Luca Moretti had every intention of keeping hidden. The truth has a strange habit of revealing itself through the smallest details. First, I ignored the feeling. Life at the library had become wonderfully busy again. New computers arrived. Reading programs expanded. Volunteers signed up faster than we could schedule them. Every day brought another reminder that the crisis was over. Everyone celebrated. Everyone moved forward. Everyone except me. Because a question refused to leave my mind. Why did Luca always seem completely unsurprised whenever the library came up? A month earlier, our future had been hanging by a thread. Now everything had changed. Yet every time I mentioned the anonymous foundation, Luca reacted with the same calm expression. Not impressed. Not curious. Not amazed. almost as if he already knew exactly how the story ended. The realization lingered quietly in the back of my thoughts until one Friday afternoon. The library was hosting a community event. Families filled the building. Children painted bookmarks. Volunteers distributed snacks. Local teachers organized activities in the reading room. It felt more like a celebration than a library. Around 3 o'clock, Margaret asked me to retrieve additional program materials from her office. I agreed and headed upstairs. The office door stood slightly open. Inside, paperwork covered nearly every surface. Grant applications, donation records, community outreach reports. As I searched for the materials she requested, a folder slipped from the edge of a desk and landed on the floor. Papers scattered everywhere. "Great," I muttered. Kneeling down, I began gathering them. Then I noticed a name. Moretti Foundation. My hands froze. For a moment I simply stared. The page contained financial information connected to the anonymous funding that had saved the library. Moretti Foundation. The same surname. The same impossible coincidence. My heart immediately began racing. I carefully placed the papers back into the folder exactly as I found them. Then I carried the materials downstairs and finished the event without saying a word. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inside, everything had. That evening, rain fell steadily across Boston. The city lights shimmered on wet streets as I walked toward a small cafe near the waterfront. Luca had asked if I wanted to meet after work. Until an hour ago, I had been looking forward to it. Now I carried questions instead. He was already there when I arrived. Sitting near the window, a cup of coffee untouched in front of him. Somehow he always looked calm. Tonight I found that slightly irritating. "You look serious," he observed as I sat down. "I found something today." For the first time, a subtle tension appeared in his expression. Barely noticeable, but real. I reached into my bag and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. The copy I made before leaving the office. His eyes dropped to the page, then slowly lifted toward me again. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. The answer was already sitting between us. "You knew," I said quietly. Rain tapped against the windows. Cars moved through the evening traffic outside. Still, Luca remained silent. "The funding." My voice softened. "The library." Finally, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Not defeated, just resigned. Like a man realizing a secret had finally reached its expiration date. "Emily." The way he said my name told me everything. "Was it you?" Another long silence followed. Then Luca nodded once. "No excuses. No explanations. Just honesty." My heart somehow felt heavier and lighter at the same time. "Why would you do that?" I asked. His gaze never left mine. For the first time since we met, the carefully controlled distance between us seemed to disappear completely. And in that moment, I knew whatever answer came next was going to change everything I thought I understood. About Luca Moretti. Sometimes the answer to a question matters less than the reason behind it. Rain continued sliding down the cafe windows while I sat across from Luca, waiting. The city outside moved through another ordinary evening, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. He had just admitted that he was the person behind the funding. The man sitting across from me had saved the library without taking credit, without asking for recognition, and without ever telling me the truth. I should have been angry. Part of me was. Yet another part could not stop wondering why. Luca lowered his eyes briefly toward the table before looking back at me. "Because of you." The answer came so quietly I almost missed it. I stared at him. "That does not explain anything." A faint smile appeared. Not amused. More like someone remembering a distant place. "I know." For several seconds he remained silent. Then, for the first time since I met him, he stopped choosing his words carefully. "The morning I saw you helping that elderly woman cross the street, I was on my way to a meeting." He glanced toward the rain outside. A very important meeting, according to everyone around me. I listened without interrupting. I remember sitting in the car and watching hundreds of people walk past her. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked twice. "Then you did." He shrugged slightly. "It should not have mattered." But it did. Luca nodded. More than it should have. His voice carried no embarrassment. Only honesty. "You gave up your bus." You made yourself late. You expected nothing in return. I looked down at my coffee. Most people would have done the same. No. His answer arrived immediately. Most people tell themselves they would. Very few actually do. The certainty in his voice caught me off guard. Luca leaned back in his chair. The world I live in is built on transactions. Every favor creates a debt. Every gesture serves a purpose. Every relationship has conditions attached. His gaze settled on me again. Then I spent weeks watching someone who seemed completely unaware that life was supposed to work that way. Heat rose to my cheeks. You were watching me? Another small smile. That part probably sounds worse than it was. Despite everything, I laughed. The tension between us softened slightly. Outside, headlights reflected across rain-soaked streets. Inside, the cafe felt strangely removed from the rest of the world. Luca's expression grew thoughtful again. The library was never really about the building. I frowned. What do you mean? He looked toward the window before answering. I kept asking myself why that moment at the intersection bothered me so much. Eventually I realized it was because you reminded me of something I had not seen in years. What? For the first time, genuine vulnerability crossed his face. It appeared only briefly, but it was there. Proof that people can still be good when nobody is watching. The words settled between us. Simple. Honest. Impossible to ignore. Suddenly the funding. The secrecy. The attention. All of it made a different kind of sense. This had never been about impressing me. It had never been about gratitude. It had been about restoring something inside himself that he thought was gone. I slowly shook my head. I only helped someone cross a street. Luca's eyes softened. That is what you think happened. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then he smiled quietly. The truth is, Emily, I think you saved something much larger than that. And sitting there across from him, listening to the rain, I realized I was finally beginning to understand the man everyone else seemed unable to see. It is strange how a single moment can divide a life into before and after. Months later, the library looked completely different. Fresh paint brightened the walls. New technology filled the learning center. Reading programs had expanded beyond anything we imagined possible. Every afternoon, children crowded around tables covered with books, art supplies, and dreams for the future. The building felt alive. Not because of the renovations, because people believed in it again. One crisp autumn afternoon, I stood near the front entrance watching families arrive. Sunlight poured through the windows, painting golden rectangles across the floor. Laughter echoed from the children's section. Somewhere upstairs, a volunteer was teaching a computer class. Everywhere I looked, life was happening. Margaret appeared beside me carrying a stack of reports. You realize attendance has nearly doubled, she said proudly. I smiled. Best problem we have ever had. She nodded before glancing across the room. You know, whoever saved this place changed a lot of lives. My eyes followed hers. Luca stood near a bookshelf speaking with a young student about a history project. The sight still felt unusual. Not because he did not belong there anymore. Because he somehow did. Yeah, I said quietly. He really did. Margaret smiled without asking questions. She had learned long ago that some stories revealed themselves in their own time. After she left, I walked toward the reading area. Luca looked up as I approached. The student thanked him and hurried away carrying a stack of books. For a moment, we simply watched the room around us. Children reading, parents talking, volunteers helping.
Ordinai moments.
Beautiful moments. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Luca turned toward me. Regret what? Getting involved. A faint smile touched his face. Not once. His answer arrived without hesitation. I believed him immediately. We walked together through the library, past shelves that nearly disappeared, past classrooms that almost never existed, past opportunities that would have vanished if one decision had gone differently. Eventually we stopped near the large front windows. Outside, the city continued moving exactly as it always had. Inside, everything felt different. I spent a long time trying to understand why you did all of this, I admitted. Luca looked out toward the street. And I think I finally figured it out. He raised an eyebrow slightly. That sounds dangerous. I laughed. You did not save the library because of the building. No. You did not do it because of me either. His smile widened slightly. Keep going. I looked around the room. At the children. The families. The community that had found a future here. Then back at him. You did it because you wanted proof that goodness still matters. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he nodded once. The simplest answer. The truest one. A comfortable silence settled between us. The kind that only exists when nothing important is left unsaid. Across the room, a little girl waved excitedly after finding a book she had been searching for. Nearby, an elderly man helped his grandson learn how to use a computer. Life continued. Quietly. Beautifully. Exactly as it should. Standing there, I suddenly remembered that cold morning months ago. The intersection. The elderly woman. The bus I missed. At the time, I thought I was helping someone cross a street. That was all. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing important. Yet looking around now, I understood the truth. Kindness rarely announces its consequences. It simply moves forward, touching lives we never expect. The elderly woman crossed a street that morning. The library crossed a bridge toward the future. And somewhere along the way, a man who thought he had seen everything discovered that compassion still had the power to surprise him. As sunlight filled the room and another ordinary afternoon unfolded around us, I realized something else. Maybe I had never been the one changing lives at all. Maybe the real miracle was watching someone remember who they wanted to be. And somehow that turned out to be the happiest ending either of us could have imagined.